it's good to read stuff you disagree with because, maybe you change your mind or maybe you just become more certain of your assumptions. Hey there, welcome to Book Overflow, the podcast for software engineers by software engineers, where every week we read one of the best technical books in the world in an effort to improve our craft. I am Carter Morgan, and I'm joined here, as always, by my co-host, Nathan Toops. How are you doing, Nathan?
Doing great. Hey, everybody.
Well, thanks for listening, everyone. Make sure to like, comment, and subscribe. Share the podcast with your coworkers. You can share it on LinkedIn, share it in Slack, whatever helps. And also, if you're looking to spend more time with Nathan and I, you can book time with us on Leland. That's the online coaching platform Nathan and I both operate on. And we're happy to help out however you might need in your career. And we've got an interesting episode for you today. We were laughing about it. You'll see. You'll see. Just pay attention, everyone. We are reading Finite and Infinite Games. This is by James P. Carse. He is professor, or I guess he was. He passed away in 2020. A professor emeritus of history and literature religion at New York University. Taught at NYU for 30 years, where he was director of religious studies for a decade. Carse wrote several books on religion and philosophy, with Finite and Infinite Games becoming his most influential work, inspiring leaders in business, technology, and the arts. Which that makes sense. I was not aware he was a professor of religion when reading this book, but he's well versed in religion. And I'll say, as a religious individual myself, I'm always impressed when I think someone kind of aptly applies stories from the Bible, and he's very well versed in his biblical knowledge, which I found impressive. And so, what is this book about? Let's just read you the introduction. It's Finite and Infinite Games offers a powerful lens for understanding all human activity through a simple distinction. Finite games are played to win, while infinite games are played to keep playing. Finite games, from tennis to warfare to career, have fixed rules, clear boundaries, and end when someone wins. Infinite games, like culture, love, and learning, change their rules to prevent anyone from winning and ensure the play continues. Through 101 brief poetic sections, Carse explores how this framework illuminates everything from power and property to death and sexuality, ultimately asking, are you playing to defeat others and end the game, or playing to include others and continue the possibilities? A little outside our usual wheelhouse, although we've mentioned this book a couple times on the podcast, and we've had some listeners say they were very excited for us to talk about it. So your day has finally come. We have read Finite and Infinite Games. Myself for the first time. Nathan, you've read this before, right?
No, it's been on my list because actually my first guest on Functionally Imperative, which is Dave Ackley, he is a retired college professor, and he cited this as his the most important book he's ever read. Oh. And so it actually came up, I think, in the software engineering book. The staff engineer book with Will Larson. Right. One of the stories mentions Finite and Infinite Games. I think it came up one or two other times, and it's interesting. It's one of these books that kind of floats around much like a Gödel's proof and Gödel's theorem type books, where these abstract sort of mathematical kind of philosophical things that come up. And so this is like a subculture geek cred CS ivory tower kind of book, right? And it reads like that too, right?
Well, so give us your thoughts, Nathan.
I will preface this with, it's a weird book. But it's very philosophical. It can obnoxiously get into this what I'm going to be calling Yoda speak, where they everything's in this like binary of finite does this, infinite does this, and you just kind of like rearrange the words a little bit. I started the book and I loved it at the beginning. I get about halfway through and I absolutely hated this book, and then I ended up loving it again at the end. And there were times in which it's not a very long book, but it's very dense. And every once in a while, I think I highlighted like half this book, and I would have to like think about something where I'm like, that's a stupid thing to say. Oh wait, that's actually kind of interesting. Huh? No, it's stupid. And then I'd come back and be like, no, actually, that's kind of profound. And so this book isn't for everyone. It is not an easy read, and it's a mode of like sort of almost pseudo-religious sounding prose, but it's also a secular book, right? Like it's not a religious book, but it's written in a very sort of like Proverbsy type of way, with a very like 80s philosophical. It kind of shows its age. It's like it was written in the 80s, and there's a lot of like weird, interesting things that I think were going on in U.S. society. So yeah, I don't know. That's probably like the most meandering general thoughts I've had on a book, and that's kind of how I feel about the book too. What about you?
I'll say, and listen, folks, we try to keep this podcast about software engineering, and so my apologies if it veers into unrelated things. Because I'll just say, as someone who's very religious and derives a lot of his worldview and morality from that lens, I'm not the target audience for this book, because I'm not really looking for a worldview. So maybe I'm not the most qualified to judge it. I hated this book. I hated this book with every fiber of my being.
Wow. Wow.
Yeah, what a follow-up to Made to Stick. So here, let me relate this to software engineering, right? I was actually just at an offsite for our company. And one thing, the offsite was good, and we had a lot of good discussions. Here's something I kind of don't love about offsites, and especially it was very prominent to me after reading Made to Stick. Once you read Made to Stick, you're so in like you laser focus when we start talking in like generalities or like vision speak, right? Like, so I work at Leland, right? And so we're talking about what does Leland want to be, right? And so we're talking about like, well, should we be trying to build like a community feature at Leland? Something a little more like social media-y, I don't know. But I hate when we say things like 1 year from now, Leland will be the premier destination for career advice or whatever. I'm like, what does that mean? How do you even measure that? Like what I like Made to Stick when we're talking about like concrete stuff. Like I would say like in 1 year, I'd like to see people on Reddit saying you can't find good information on Reddit. You have to go to Leland, right? Like to me, that's just like so much more concrete and helps us understand what we're actually trying to build. And I'm not trying to plug my own company here. I just have to talk about it because it's my job. And like I said, I'm trying to talk in concrete terms here. So this book is like the complete opposite of that. It's just so much, like you said, Yoda speak, which I think is the lowest form of speaking. And
How dare
there's
you?
just so there's so much in here that like he would say it, and I just kind of immediately be like, "What? No, like that's not true," or "What are you talking about?" or "That's dumb." I will say, so here's the glimmer of hope here. As I was reading through the notes, because Nathan prepared the notes for this episode and always does a great job of it, or you use Claude heavily, right, Nathan?
Yeah, though I had
Yeah.
to use my own. I had to go old school,
Okay.
like early episodes this time. But yes, I do. I do
Yeah.
use Claude heavily. Yeah.
So I will say, when I was like going through and like kind of like annotating the notes of like my thoughts, there was more than I thought where I was like, oh, well, I guess this part's okay. Or I guess, yeah, I see what he's saying here. And so maybe if you just like pick the best gems out of this book, you can find like, hey, this is pretty good. But there was just so much in here. And I'm with you on that whole sexuality chapter. I was worried about getting put on some sort of list by reading this thing. And
yeah, we'll get into that.
Yeah.
It's really strange. Like the book's very like obtuse. There is some concrete things, and he's kind of doing all these prose and talking about society and war. And then there's like a section on sexuality, and you're like, this is just weird. Like
Yeah.
it made way more. There's a lecture that I watched. We'll get right back to your point here, but there's a lecture I watched on accident because I thought it was the Audible for it. It's like an hour and a half, and that made me love the book way more. And unfortunately, it's not included in the book. It's him just
Right.
talking to an audience and doing Q&A. And he kind of framed the sexuality chapter in a way that was not creepy and not super weird. And I was like, oh, well, if you'd actually talked about it this way in the book, it's really about relationships and not about sexuality. It's about like lusting over somebody versus actually having a companion, right? That's what he
Right.
actually meant, but that's not how it read in the book, like at all.
Yeah, it's very like free love, like in an infinite game, we'd all be sleeping with each other. I'm like, what are you
Yeah.
talking about?
Yeah.
Is this our first book with a sex scene? I mean, this is.
I think it is. I think
Yeah.
unquestionably it is. Yeah. So
Anyhow, so I am a strong opinions loosely held kind of guy, and I am not so obstinate I mean, maybe by the end of this book, we'll see it. We'll see. Well, let's put it to the test, readers. I said who I would recommend this book to is absolutely no one. Don't read this book. But by the end of this podcast, perhaps I can be convinced. So
and maybe you can be like, weirdos like Nathan should read this book.
So I'm here to talk about it. You're in for a treat, folks. This is basically Nathan trying to convince me that this isn't the worst book ever written. So let's get into it. Nathan, walk us through it. Let's talk about the general thesis, Finite and Infinite Games. That's what chapter 1 is all about. There are at least two kinds of games.
Yeah. So yes. So the book starts out, and I think it's probably the most famous part of the book are literally the first two things it says. And maybe some people want to just sound smart and read the first chapter and then just like put the book away. I think there's a non-zero sample size of people that probably did that. But it starts with there are at least two kinds of games. One could be called finite, the other infinite. A finite game is played for the purpose of winning, an infinite game for the purpose of continuing to play. If that's all you read out of the book, that's pretty much the book.
Right.
And so the idea here, and I think, again, let me tie this back into software engineering, and I think why some software engineers are into this. Linus Torvalds made Linux into an infinite game, right? He wasn't trying to beat Microsoft. He happened to beat Microsoft at servers for web, but he did it by playing the infinite game of having fun, doing something he was deeply interested in, and inviting other people to come play with him, right? And so in the framing of this book, as we kind of talk about things, people who play infinite games are in it for the love of that. If Linus Torvalds' only purpose it was to play it as a finite game and said, I must destroy Microsoft, that would probably be pretty hard to get people to join along. And like, that doesn't sound fun. You're trying to like remove the other player. You're trying to do these other things. And it probably lots of people have tried to come up with things that would kill off Microsoft and it failed. You really would have to be much stronger than Microsoft to defeat Microsoft, right? And that's what but the book also doesn't say you shouldn't play finite games. It might sound like, oh, losers play finite games and the enlightened, most amazing people play infinite games. I think this book, to me, was like a framing of, you should know when you're playing a finite game where you're trying to, you're playing soccer or you're playing football, right? The rules are well established. You know who's on each other side. Someone comes out as the victor, and that's a finite game. It has a beginning and an end, right? Everyone agrees. An infinite game, though, would be someone who, let's say they love football so much that they go all the way up to being a professional, and every day they get to go play, right? It's not a job. It's not that they must go play football. It's that they get to play football, and they get to do this, and maybe they end up becoming a coach or owning a team, or they continue to play the game. And I think if you put this in like a career development standpoint and you kind of try to, again, this book is not about that. You have to kind of read this and go, how would this apply to my life? Can I find the infinite game in software engineering? Can I find the infinite game in doing startups, right? If you're a founder and your only purpose is to get acquired or go public, that's a finite game, right? You're either going to win or lose that game. You're either going to, they talk about in the book, getting a title. That finite games, you get a title, right? You get, I did the finite game of going to graduate school and getting a master's degree in computer science. Now I can walk around and say, oh, I have a master's in computer science, and maybe have some expectation that the audience, and he talks about this a lot, the audience should respond to me differently now that I have this title, right? I played a finite game. The infinite game is somebody who maybe never finished school and just kept solving interesting problems. And maybe they learned the same things I learned in graduate school for their own purposes. And they have a fulfilling life solving these types of problems, right? If I use the master's degree as a stepping stone on my infinite game, that's great. He's saying that maybe you're missing the point if you think that life is just a group of finite games of gathering titles, and that accumulating the most titles is actually what a fulfilling life is. His argument in this book is basically like, it's actually not. And that there's always a winner and a loser, and that if your only purpose is to play a finite game, you actually are, and this is kind of controversial. I think we can get into this. He basically, again, in that lecture, he talks about he was a wrestler in high school. And again, these stories I think helped the book so much. He was a wrestler in high school. In the first 3 years, he was terrible at wrestling, but he loved it. He actually had a lot of fun. And then, and part of it was that he was trying to impress his father. His father really wanted him to be a wrestler, but he never felt like he was really meeting his father's expectations. In his senior year, he actually got good, and he was undefeated. And the more times he won, the more gut-wrenchingly nervous he was that he was going to stop being undefeated. And he wasn't having fun anymore. And every time he got out there, he was terrified that he wasn't going to be the undefeated wrestler any longer. And he was, the whole time he was trying to prove to his father he's good enough. And so I think that there's if you're not careful, finite games can basically become a way to justify the most terrible inner voice in you that says, I'm not worthy. And again, you have to read between the lines. There's all this Yoda speak. It's pretty obnoxious. Like, this book is pretty obnoxious in a lot of ways. But sometimes it's a reminder of, like, did I replace the infinite game with a bunch of finite games? Am I still having fun? Do I feel like I must do this? If I must play the game, I'm not really playing a game anymore, right? And I think that's the big takeaway that I get at the end here. Now, again, weird sexuality chapter, weird stuff about war. I think that this book over applies binary comparison. Like, it feels pretty forced that it's like, it's either finite or it's infinite, and you're like, okay,
like maybe it could be a third thing. Right.
Yeah, exactly. Right. Right.
Yeah. So I'll say with this chapter, I agree. Right. And I think that's part of the frustration I have with the book is, like, in some ways, you, listener, are consuming this book in the best possible way because it's two people who read it, and then we're just kind of summarizing the ideas. And, like, there are interesting ideas in this book, don't get me wrong. This being the most interesting, the finite and infinite game portion of it. But, like, it is mired in this soup of Yoda speak. And, like, for example, you're talking about this wrestler story. I don't even remember that story.
No, that's what I'm saying. It was the lecture. No, it was the lecture.
Oh, it was in the lecture. Okay.
It was in the lecture. It wasn't in the book. Again, like, I wish that he had done some made to stick stuff, honestly. I wish he had said, give me some abstract platitude. Give me a personal story of how this actually applied to a life or these other things. That wasn't there. Right. And maybe maybe this is sort of like the professorial expectation of 1986, and you're supposed to write something obtuse that everybody's kind of like, am I smart enough to understand this book? And then you become, a tenured professor at NYU, right?
Right.
It's what it kind of feels like. This book is not for the faint of heart. And again, I don't blame like, your reaction. I'm not, like, offended that you didn't like this book. Like, I didn't like this book for part of the reading. I was in the same boat with you, actually.
Maybe I should listen to the lecture. Well, maybe I should never ever think about this again.
I think I'm tooting my own horn right now. You could listen to this podcast and listen to that lecture and skip the book if you want to get, like, the major gist of it. Like, if you're into weird philosophical stuff, like, one of my favorite books, and you would absolutely hate this book. I will not put this on the list. There's a post-communist French philosopher who wrote this book called Simulacra and Simulation. It's actually, like, in the Matrix. It's the book that Neo has the floppy disk in, and but it's by Boyard, and Boyard is this, like, it's not a long book. It's incredibly difficult to read, but he's the one who basically argued that, like, in the future, everyone's going to shoot for 15 minutes of fame. He basically talked about how, like, around a dinner table, they're going to film people eating dinner and having a conversation, and then people are going to watch it. That's prolific, but you have to go through the entire. You're going to have to go through the entire book of him talking about, simulations and, creating the image of God and removing the image of God and all these other, like, weird things. I love that kind of stuff. Like, I'm like, oh, so weird, so cool. Most people, that's all you needed to know. Oh, this guy, like, had a prediction about, the attention spans and reality TV, and had some hot takes, like, and it was in the Matrix. Like, cool. You can sound smart at a dinner party. That's probably all you really care about for this. And there you go.
Well, so I'll say I do like this distinction of finite and infinite games. I felt like I have gone wrong in my career and my life by not recognizing the kind of game I'm playing.
Same.
My stint in big tech, I now recognize as a finite game, as something where I'm like, hey, look, this got me great experience. It looks great on my resume. It uh, bought us a house. It set us up on really solid financial footing, but I didn't love it. And now I kind of am in pursuit of that infinite game. What am I going to do kind of for the rest of my life? And you can't just, it's not like you find the infinite game and then just play it forever. Like, there's going to be finite games within that infinite game. Sometimes you might have to pause the infinite game to focus on a finite game. But I'm trying to think about like, okay, what do I want to do that's going to give me energy and fulfillment for the rest of my life? Right. I think, parenting is something that is an infinite game, but you can go wrong by treating it as a finite game. It's like, I just got to get to the end of this milestone. I just got to do this, right? But it's going to be playing forever. And I think recognizing that helps you understand, like, okay, I should find the joy in this. Yeah, I think this is a pretty interesting idea here, and one worth considering.
And I'll be honest, in the 21st century, if he was in his 20s or 30s, putting this thing together now, this would have been a really great Substack 10,000 word essay that would have gone viral, and people have been like, yeah, and he would have honed it down and then, kind of been able to speak on it. Actually, so in chapter 3, I'm going to hop around a little bit because I think this is good. Chapter 3, it's called I Am the Genius of Myself, which again is pretty woo-woo, but he basically is arguing that only you are this sort of like innate manifestation of yourself, and that only you're like a unique expression in the universe. Okay, so that's kind of like the woo-woo stuff. But to talk about the parenting piece, there's a little section here and it said, my parents may have wanted a child, but they could not have wanted me. And the idea was you weren't guessable, right? The parents had the desire to have a child, and then you came in and they could not have predicted that you were going to be the one that was their child. And there's a lot of this play of like, I symbolically want something, but when I get it, it's a unique manifestation, right? My career, I might say I want to go work at big tech, but you may not know which big tech company you're going to go to, right? So what is that journey? And so this idea is that like there's this unique manifestation that comes through. And again, this is that playfulness thing, right? If a parent had said, I want a child with this exact personality that when they're 3, I'm going to, discipline or reward them this exact way, that would be really strange. I don't think anyone frames their lives that way, right? But they say, I would like 3 kids. I'd like to live in this part of the country. I'd like to do, you can kind of have these abstract sort of symbolic things. But there's this idea that like, hey, let the symbols be the symbols, right? Let the goals be the goals. But that inside of that, there's this those goals happen inside of an infinite game. And he talks about this too. I don't know if he actually talks about evil like at one point in the book. He basically says you can play, untold number of finite games inside of an infinite game, right? So let's say you take like the idea of mathematics of an infinite line, right? And I can put line segments inside of that infinite line, right? The finite games are those line segments, A to B, B to C. But the line itself goes off to infinity. His argument is that if you're constrained in a finite game and then asked to play infinite games, that this is actually evil. That you are being asked to do something that's impossible. And he even talked about this is like putting someone in a ghetto, right? Like like putting someone in a labor camp, putting someone in, and we've seen these evil acts in history where they give these constraints where they aren't free to be who they are. And yet they're asked to, operate as normal humans or something within those constraints. And again,
the book is anti-Holocaust, which I think is a good,
good
view.
Yeah, you're like, you can nod your head on that one, right?
Yes.
Regardless of how you feel about the book. Yeah. And so, anyway, I loved the genius of myself piece again. It's like, Carter, no one can make the better life for you than you, right?
Fair.
Yeah.
And I think that's part of when we're like discussing this, because like we're talking about ideas in isolation here, and you can kind of pick out an idea and be like, "Hey, what about this idea?" I'm like, "Well, yeah, I mean that's a good idea." And I think the problem I had when like, and I listened to this book, not reading it, is you kind of like throw out like a hot take and then just move immediately past it. And sometimes I'd be like, wait a minute, whoa, you can't talk about that. This actually is one that I am curious to get your take on. My parents may have wanted a child, but they could not have wanted me. How similar are you to your parents, Nathan?
So there's some contention in my household, I think,
Right.
because I'm a lot like my dad, and I'm
Okay.
the oldest. I'm the oldest son, and I'm a lot like my dad. Though my dad's not entrepreneurial, he's really hard worker. He's very scientifically curious, and he's picked a life in which he's like he was a pilot. Then he became like when he was in his 30s, he went back to medical school,
Oh,
and he
cool.
pivoted to becoming a doctor. And he's always like followed his curiosity, and even being a doctor, he's now at Mayo Clinic. So he's like had this really cool career later in life, kind of piece. And I've always thought that that was amiable. I've always been very like intellectually curious and kind of followed those things, but also try to be practical, right? Like I want to take care of my family. I have these other interests. Um, so I'm very similar in that case. Uh, I also have some aspects of my mom, and I have a good relationship with my parents. So like I actually
Yeah.
like care about them, even if I vehemently disagree maybe on some politics or this or that. I always try to make sure that our relationship's in a healthy place, and I'm
Hmm.
in a place of love. It's not always easy with like with sibling dynamics and with different choices that family members make. It's not always like that, um, but yeah, I guess hopefully that answers.
No,
Uh,
that makes sense to me. Because I'm similar. I'm a lot like my mom, with flavors of my dad, and I find it interesting. Just like this idea that like my parents may have wanted a child, but they could not have wanted me. I actually take a great deal of comfort as a parent in knowing that my kids are half me and half my wife,
oh,
and
interesting. Yeah,
I can often think about like I can view how they're acting, and I can think about myself and how I acted at that age, and I recognize a lot of thought patterns in them that were in me. My kids are still young. My oldest is 8, right? And so I know as they grow up and become teenagers, like a lot of that kind of goes out the window. Um, but I remember like when I served my religious mission when I was younger. So I left at 18 right after high school, got back at 20. I was in Brazil. And I was shocked when I got back. And when you're gone back in those days, when you were on a mission, you only called home twice a year on Christmas and Mother's Day. Aside from that, you didn't speak with your
wow,
parents.
I didn't
Yeah,
know that.
yeah. It's different now. They call home every week now. But I was shocked when I got back. I had picked up my dad's mannerisms being gone for 2 years,
Wow,
which just I know, right? Like absolutely shocked me. Um, and so sometimes I think like this is one thing that like I have like a strong reaction again, like this like, and I don't think this is exactly what he's trying to say here. He doesn't get too much into it, but this idea like my parents may have wanted a child, but they could not have wanted me. Is it true that I could not have known the exact emotional and psychological makeups of my kids, David, Teddy, Peter, and Thomas? Like, no, I couldn't have known that. Is it true that I wanted an individual who was a blend of half me and half Lydia? That's true. I don't want a child who's just like a random child plucked out of the ether, right? And so, like, yeah, like it's not the point of this chapter. It's not the point of this book. But I think I'm just trying to illustrate to the audience why this book is like difficult for me, because he kind of just tossed out
interesting.
something like this really quickly, and then I'd be like, wait a
So
minute, whoa, hold up.
and I'll get philosophical on this too because I think that's interesting, and I think that my view on it and yours could be compatible, even though I think we're kind of taking different approaches. Like I was just talking to our daughter about this. She's about to turn 10. She's been asking more questions about this kind of stuff. And we were just talking about how she's half me and
Yeah.
half my wife. But I was like, but there's an element of randomness here. I was like, the egg that made half of you from your mother was actually there since she was in the womb of her mother,
Yeah.
right? And that egg was released on that month. And like there's this like very interesting thing where like part of you was there since the beginning of your mom. And but then there's this complete randomness, which is that like what I provided is millions of little bitty variations of myself that are constantly being generated, complete
Right.
randomness of the universe. All of this weird like things have to happen, for all the environmental conditions and everything else. And yet those two things merge and become you. And that any little thing could have been like deciding to have intercourse later in the same day
Right.
would have resulted in a different child, a different month, a different, all these other things of, it's so weird to think that part of you is basically predestined, with the mother at her conception. And the other one is like so like statistically improbable that the other half of you is going to happen at any moment, that to me that's like the dance of the universe. Like that, we see this all the time. There's certain things in the universe, like the sun's going to explode one day, right? We know the life cycle of the solar system and things like that, and yet we don't know when. Like we have no way of predicting exactly when that's going to happen, or any individual thing of like that's going to happen in our world. And so when I read this, I was like, that's where my brain went to, which was I wanted a child. And yes, I think welcoming it, knowing that there's going to be some familiarity and some surprises, but that I couldn't have guessed the unique combination, right? Um, one different sperm could have made intelligence go up 20% or down 20%, right? One different
Right.
sperm
Right.
could have changed the hair color or the eye color, right? And yet it still was half me, right? It still was half Sarah. And
And this,
yeah.
and maybe it's because I have four and they're all boys. And I look but I look across them and like there's absolutely a through line there, right? And
Right.
I know that's not the same in every family. That's why I was asking you, like, well, how similar are you to your parents? Because some people feel very strongly the opposite way. Where
Yeah.
they're like, I am not like my dad at all. I'm not like my mom. They just don't understand me, right? I've just
Right.
never been that way. Like I know it's like I believe it's like scientifically like proven, like kind of hardwired into us that like from like 16 to 24 or whatever, you just have to go through a phase where you think your parents are stupid. Like it's just designed for us to
Right.
like it's built into us so that we will leave the nest and
Right.
form our own lives, right?
And
But
I
I
was
never went through that phase. Like
interesting.
I always just kind of figured my parents knew what they were talking about, and I disagree with my parents on plenty, right?
Right.
But I have a good
But
relationship with
I
them.
do think though
We
that
go to football together. But anyhow,
there are
what were you saying?
there's certain groups though that I think have a familial cohesion that's different than the general population. I actually
I think
think that
so.
your religious background, I think that's actually like a characteristic more times than not, that there's actually a lot more
Right.
familial cohesion. Immigrant families have this a lot, right? Where because of the alienness
Right.
of the change, the family becomes very tight. I think that there are different groups that maybe don't have that. My brother and my sister and I have had different relationships with our parents. Some of us have rebelled and done other things more than others. I was never like embarrassed or mortified or any of that stuff by my parents. I was very determined to get out of the house, but it wasn't to escape anything. It was really because
Right.
I felt that South Louisiana was just not big enough for me. Like I wanted to go see
Mhm.
the world. I got lucky. Most Louisianians don't leave Louisiana, right? It's
Right.
statistical. Like I think of all the states, it's the most insular.
Oh, really?
The highest likelihood. I think Utah's like up there too, but
Right.
like
Right.
the odds of you being, if you're born there, staying there, Louisiana is the highest. Um,
Interesting.
and so those of us who've left are kind of weirdos. Like
Hmm.
we're a weird group. Um, and when I met my high school sweetheart, my wife, we've been married for over 20 years at this point. Um, one of the things that bound us was that we both knew we wanted to not be in Louisiana.
Right.
And even though that seems like very like surface level thing, there's the deepness of that drive, and that was independent. I didn't convince her to leave Louisiana. When we started talking and I realized she also could see herself not living there, there was like a bonding that happened that was very special. And while lots of details of our lives have changed, that was an infinite game for us, right? We saw the Louisiana thing as sort of like a restrictive place. And that I'm not saying I wouldn't ever move back to Louisiana. Like I couldn't imagine that actually at this point in my life. I'm not hating on it. I actually think the people, the food, the complexity of society, Louisiana gave me a lot. And as
Right.
actually I've
Right.
gotten older, I appreciate it more. But from an infinite game standpoint, I was like, oh, and again, this gets us to the sexuality chapter, so I'll do this now. He's really weird about it, and it almost has like pedo vibes. It's weird, like, oh, like anything goes if everyone's cool with it. And I'm like, yeah, but like, no, like that's not, what he really means though, he talks about this thing about moving someone versus touching someone. And that moving, you can watch a movie and feel moved by it, right? And it's weird that it ties into sexuality with this. And I agree with this, like a Pixar film particularly, right? I think Disney was genius in buying Pixar because Pixar is one of the most effective storytelling groups on the planet. I still, if I watch the opening scene it Up with that relationship between that couple as they get older, like I tear up. And I'm not like a tear up kind of person, but like it gets me, like it, because it's a type of relationship that I understand. And I'm going to be sad when one of us passes away and the other person's left by themselves for some period of time. The idea though is that can move me, but it can't touch me. And by touching me, he does mean in the physical sense, like in the sexuality piece. And he's like, kind of, this is the philosophical piece. But touching can also be from like, if you're at a live theater production, or if you're at a sermon, or if you're at anything that actually has humans in the room, you can be touched by something. And I think people who've experienced this, it is not replaceable. A movie that moves you you can be moved and touched at the same time, right? And he talks about this in the book of like, touching is a reciprocal thing. If someone touches you, you touch them too, right? Both sides of the party are getting something. And he argues that moving someone's a finite game. I can watch the Pixar movie over and over again. It's got a beginning, a middle, and an end. And again, he's not saying that that's a bad thing, but you can't replace it with being touched. And that in the lens of right now, I feel like a lot of people have, right? This is where social media does not replace being in a room with people and having real conversations and having a close family, right? Families touch. That's what they do by definition, right? If you and your spouse, you and your children, you influence each other, you touch one another. It's not you recording something. Here's my, dad moving recording and then giving it to your kid. No, there's a reciprocal relationship there. And again, he calls it sexuality. And I think it's so unfortunate because it's really about relationships. It's not about sexuality.
Right. Like, again, and like, I'm enjoying this discussion because like, maybe so I'll say, I think that's a flaw of a book. If you have to like constantly read between the lines to get like the real thing. Because just taking it at like face value, like, yeah, I wish I only have the audio book. I don't have the print book. But this chapter is nuts. Like, it has a lot of stuff about like private parts. Like, oh, in an infinite game, there are no private parts. We all and like it seriously like it gets a little like it sounds like he's talking about like free love and like we should all just have sex with each other and it's gonna be great.
Oh, like, it gave me the ick for sure. Like I'm gonna use a Gen Z term, but yeah.
And that I'm just like, what on earth? Like it almost felt to me like, is this really why you wanted to write the book, James? Like you just wanted to like write your weird sex chapter and then you had to kind of like add other stuff. But then if you want to reframe it around like, oh, it's about meaningful relationships, it's about coming together, it's about the ability to move one another or to touch one another, like, yeah, I'm on board. I'm just not on board
exactly
with this, like,
and you're right, if you read the book by itself, that is not how I interpreted it. Now going back, I kind of see it, but it was a failure in communication on his part. Again, if you go to the lecture,
while it's on my mind, do you think the lecture is good enough for most people? Like, do you think it's a superior way to consume this material?
Yes, you will miss some stuff because they kind of reference stuff in the book. But if you read the first chapter and then watch the lecture or listen to the lecture, I think you got the good stuff.
Right.
So this book also kind of hit me different too. I was in New York City with my family. And we were actually staying in Greenwich Village. We had a friend who had a basement apartment that they let us stay in. It was really amazing. And it was right by NYU, like NYU's walking distance. So I'm reading this book NYU's right there. And in the lecture, he actually talks about Bleecker Street. And Bleecker Street, where I was, Bleecker Street was like a block away. This is actually the place I was staying in is like a block away from where Carrie in Sex and the City's like Greenwich Village brownstone is physically. And so there's like literally young women who are just like taking pictures incessantly. It was the funniest thing. But Bleecker Street, he talks about in the lecture, and he talks about this couple going on a date. And it's talking about the sexuality section. And he goes, this lady is just, in this very skimpy sort of outfit, really, really dolled up and stuff. And the guy is there on this date, enjoying that other people are looking at her. And there's this finite game of like his value of her is based off of the other people desiring her, right? And that's not an infinite game form of relationship. And again, you see this and you're like, oh, this framing makes way more sense. And he's like, no, the infinite game is that the two of you influence each other, that you deeply care about each other, that you aren't concerned about, the lusts of people in the outside world, and that you're not making decisions on how you could be doing this stuff. And I was like, okay, now I get what you mean. And it's not pedo stuff at all. Like it's actually like pretty straightforward. Now, I think someone who is into like the free love, stuff could read this and get a lot out of it too for justifying their own views on things. This is not a game I want to play,
folks.
It's not a game I want to play. Like I will tell you that like that's too many variables. I'll just put it that way. Yeah. Like I'm trying to minimize the number of variables in my life. So
this is just personal preference. I won't go so far as to say like all books written this way are bad, but like just because like again, like I'm hearing about this lecture, I'm like, oh, that sounds really interesting. And this is such a funny book. I don't think we could have chosen a funnier book to read after Made to Stick. Like honestly, like it's just complete whiplash because like I said, Made to Stick is maybe my favorite nonfiction book of all time. And I really do value the strategies it has there for communicating an idea. And this book, it's just the complete opposite of Made to Stick. Like it just does not respect the success checklist at all.
It's not.
But because then like I'm like, oh, like this book would be really interesting if it was just punctuated with even some of these stories, right? Like, and I think about that from like a religious perspective too. Like Made to Stick talks a lot about Proverbs, and of course in the Bible there's the book Proverbs, right? And there's a lot of good stuff in the book Proverbs. But if you talk to any Christian, when they're talking about their religious framework or what's moved them or kind of how they think about the world, it's very rare that they'll pull out like this proverb, like, oh, like, this is what I live my life by. I mean, the reason why the New Testament, and in particular the four Gospels of the New Testament, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, form like the backbone of Christianity is because it's nothing but stories of Jesus, right? And like that, the whole what would Jesus do? Like the reason we can ask ourselves what would Jesus do is because there's a bunch of stories about him, right? And so like I think stories are a really powerful teaching mechanism. And this book has like no stories. And I can see some people being like, well, no, of course it doesn't have any stories because this is just supposed to be the raw, unfiltered, like this is the meat of it all. And like maybe that's true. I think it's a poor experience as a reader, and hearing about this lecture makes me much more interested in this book.
Yeah, because it actually has stories. And I think you're right. I'm not religious in any traditional sense. I grew up in like Southern Christian household, so I'm actually very familiar with the Bible, studied it extensively, and I still teach my daughter parables that are from the New Testament because I think that there's some really good stuff in there. I also teach, and this is where we get into woo stuff, Greek mythology, Hinduism, Buddhism, but again, they're all taught through stories and parables. I think there's a lot of wisdom in a lot of places, but I'm also like not anti one religion or the other. I think that the parables in the New Testament have a lot of. We actually just watched Godspell, the musical, and it was the one about, you can't serve two masters. And we were just talking about this. Like, it was like a really interesting way of having a deeper conversation. And I appreciate that. And you're right. And there's even a whole section in this book on mythology and the importance of stories and what they are. And yet he doesn't use any stories in the book. I will say one of the things I wanted to bring up, there's one, chapter 6 is on control of nature and society.
Yes.
And again, this gets weird. He basically talks about like machines versus gardens. And that machines are this, again, obviously finite, and that gardens are infinite, right? You tend to the garden, you don't control it. The garden is kind of this thing that you do with nature, where a machine is something that's separate from nature. But there was a couple of things that I think he didn't intend them to be what they mean now, but are actually they're kind of pertinent. One of them, let me see if I can find the exact quote. While a machine greatly aids the operator in such tasks, it also disciplines its operator. As the machine might be considered to extend the arms or legs of the worker might be considered an extension of the machine. All machines, and especially very complicated machines, require operators to place themselves in a provided location and to perform functions mechanically adapted to the functions of the machine. To use a machine for control is to be controlled by the machine. And I know that is a Yoda speak, but I actually think that to use a machine for control is to be controlled by the machine is something that I think about a lot, especially with like large language models or social media, is that like we get value. It extends our abilities. I can communicate with people across the world, or I can be exposed to ideas that I wasn't exposed to. I use YouTube for cooking stuff all the time, right? I love cooking gourmet meals, and but then I can also easily binge watch, 5 different Gordon Ramsay things or something.
Well, yeah, I don't know how to feel about this one, right? Yeah. Because like on the one hand, I agree in the sense that like to use the machine for control is to be controlled by the machine. ChatGPT, in a way, I use it for control, right? Like this is a machine that aids me in my day-to-day tasks, right? And helps me kind of control the world around me. But at the same time, when I interact with ChatGPT, I am subjecting myself to how that model was trained, how the biases and judgment calls of those who trained the model. Like it's shaping in some ways the way I think.
Right.
And so I absolutely think I'm being controlled by it. The problem I have with this is like he's describing a real physical machine here. And while he's reading this, I'm thinking of like a crane truck operator. He's like, to use the machines to be controlled by the machine. Like, I don't think so, James. Like, I think the crane truck operator can just hop out of the machine. And like, I think that machine is actually pretty subject to him. I think he's controlling the machine. And then he's like, well, no, because when you get inside the machine, you have to subject yourselves to its rules. I'm like, I guess. Like, I don't know.
Where I would take this a step further, though, is once you become talented using that machine and you realize maybe you have a unique ability to operate this crane, and then somebody offers you 6-figure salary, because crane operators, I don't know if you know this, crane operators make a ton of money because it's a very dangerous job for, liability and all these other things. So are you playing the infinite game that you just love cranes, or do you take the money and it's miserable? And so is the machine in some way forcing you to take the money? Because if you walk away from the crane, you don't have an option for making 6 figures, because, before that you were just kind of like on the crew, doing basic construction stuff that was not 6 figures. And so you can always frame these things in a way of like, well, is this a system of control? And then I go, oh, well, I love programming, but is the programming controlling me? Like, is my relationship with this machine actually changing my behavior so that I'm looking for more machine relationships? I don't know. That's kind of like one of the Eric Wareheim mind explosion thing for me.
This whole book reminded me of like when you're at a party and you get cornered by someone who won't quit talking about like some weirdo stuff, right? Like, and I was listening to it. And so like that's how it felt. Because like
you probably didn't go to these kind of parties. Right. You probably go to these type of parties, but it would be the guy who smoked too much weed, and then You're like, you feel really deep right now. I can tell. Like you feel like you
Yes.
solved all the problems of the universe, but like, buddy,
There's like
tomorrow morning you're not going to remember any of this.
there's like a point in the book, and again, I don't have the text in front of me, but he's talking about how like actually when you get in a car and then you drive to the airport and you get on the plane and you fly somewhere, you actually haven't left anything at all because the car had carpet and your house had carpet and the airplane had carpet, right? And I'm a little like, no, you idiot. I left Utah and I went to Florida.
Right.
Like I am in a different place. And it's just one of those things where it's like, is there a kernel of truth there in that, like, if I'm leaving one part of my life, right, like for example, I go to this offsite, right, and like I leave the office and I go to Bear Lake, but I'm still doing work at both places. Have I really left anything? Isn't this kind of just a continuation of my daily ritual? Like, yeah, there's an idea there, and I think it makes sense to ask ourselves, like, are we really truly breaking the mold? Are we really truly trying to do something different, or is this kind of just an extension of what we're doing all the time?
If I go to New York City and the first thing I do is go look for a Starbucks,
right?
Did I go to New York City? Right?
It's like Michael Scott, talking about his favorite New York pizza place, and it's Sbarro, right?
Yeah, exactly. And so I think this is part of this thing is like there was some quote. I don't think it was in this book, or no, it was in this book. It was something, and again, it was very pretentious. Let's see. Travel is discovering distance, not overcoming it. I think his point was that like the true traveler, I don't think I put the quote in here, but it's basically like the true traveler has no destination in mind, or something very pretentious sounding where you're like, okay, like most of us are not going to like go on an endless journey with no into it. Now, some people do, right? Backpack across Europe and just see where the wind takes me. Maybe that's the only true form of traveling, and Carter and I have no idea what that really is.
Yeah, he has another quote. He says, "Society regards its waste as an unfortunate but necessary consequence of its activities. What is left when we have made essential societal goods available. But waste is not the result of what we have made; it is what we have made. Waste plutonium is not an indirect consequence of the nuclear industry; it is the product. It is a product of that industry." And this is another one I'm like, no, I'm pretty sure it's an indirect consequence. Like, there's another quote I hate, which is like, the purpose of a system
so I loved
is what.
This one.
Okay, okay, great. Let's chat about it. I hate the quote, the purpose of a system is what it does, because like I think people use that as like a really cynical take. Like, the purpose of the DMV is to make you wait in line, but like I don't think that's true. Like, I think the purpose of the DMV is to like do stuff with motor vehicles, and the fact that you have to wait in line is an unfortunate byproduct of that. And I just see this quote thrown around very cynically in like, well, so the whole thing is bull crap, right? I'm like, I don't think that's true. Like, think about it from a software perspective, right? Like, the purpose of Agile is to have meetings. I'm like, I don't think that's true. Like, I think Agile actually has a really solid purpose behind it of delivering value to stakeholders faster. You know, creating working units of software, continually evaluating stakeholder feedback in your development process. Like, I think that's a really cool, noble purpose of Agile. Does it often result in a lot more meetings? Yeah, absolutely. And in poorly implemented places, does it often result in a lot more unnecessary, pointless meetings?
Right.
100%. But then I think you just say like, oh, well, that's the purpose of Agile, to make you have meetings. Like, no. And then when you start saying that, like, oh, this is not a byproduct, it is a product. It's almost like we treat all outcomes as like equally valid. And I don't think that's true. I think you need to focus on what you're actually trying to do and recognize what are byproducts and try to eliminate them.
Right. And well, so there's two things here. I don't think it's possible to use nuclear in this way we're using it without creating the waste. And so
Sure.
I think what he was arguing here, well, number one, I think he was trying to stir something up, because I think, and he actually talks about this, and in this again, this gets back to biblical stuff too, right? Uncleanliness is like a topic that's brought up a lot in the Old Testament. And I think that there's a visceral need to define something as waste, right? We say, no, this is an output that we want, and this thing is waste. And we use this to say, separate this this unclean thing from the clean things. This is what we desired to be the outcome. This undesired thing, we have to do something special with it. And he talks about this. He actually says, because waste is unveiling, it is not placed out of if it is not placed out of sight, is declared a kind of anti-property, that no one owns it. And I thought that was interesting in that, like, I'd never thought of waste being framed this way, where it's like, it's so undesirable that we don't even take ownership of it. We're like,
right.
I'm going to put this in the garbage.
That nuclear waste.
Yeah, right. Like, I put this in the garbage can, and then society decides, oh, well, I can take my garbage bag and put it in this thing, and then somebody's going to take it away. And I never think about it again. I don't think I created this. Where is it doing right now? Now that my garbage has grown up and has moved out of the house, like, what is my garbage doing?
Yeah.
We just, like, put it in a big pile somewhere. And I'm like, I hope it was taken care of in accordance to the rules and that we're not making things worse. But I also literally never think about it again.
That's fair. Like, maybe my garbage is being lit on fire every day. I don't know.
Right. Or,
right.
You'll see those things where it's like, oh, ethical e-waste or whatever. And then you realize that, like, they lied to you and they just, like, shipped it over to India. And there's this huge pile of, like, e-waste that was never taken care of. From a maybe we should think about this standpoint, again, I think it's prescient in that, like, I'd never thought of the term anti-property, or this thing that, like, I might produce something that I think is so gross that I want nothing to do with it, and I want it to be, like, never associated with me again. And yet I'm producing
some pull requests like that.
Yeah, exactly. You're like, I phoned that one in. Yeah. The ticket asked me to do this. I didn't write this. The ticket that told me to write that code. And so anyway, again, should we take all of this absolutely literally? And should we, like, blame ourselves? But he also argues, like, the uncomfortable truth too, which is that, like, poverty, homelessness, that these aren't accidents, that these are actually outputs of society, and that you don't have to structure society this way. It's not an inevitability, but we've decided that our society has a waste product that is this uncomfortable thing to look at. And I think there's a sense of powerlessness and these other things that no one wants tent encampments and, people using drugs freely on the streets and stuff. But I think a lot of cities, for instance, don't know how to deal with it. And so I think I liked this, that gave me a lens to think about, like, well, I don't take ownership. If I go visit a city, I'm not like, I caused this somehow, right? Or these people caused this somehow. I just look at it and go, oh, there's a tent encampment. Like, no ownership, right? I have no ownership of it. I might have a lot of sympathy. I might say, oh man, these people are suffering so much. They're not getting the mental health care that they need. They're addicted to drugs. Like, I wish there was something I could do. But I'm just a visitor. This isn't my problem. I don't own this. This isn't my output. This is an interesting way of framing it and being like, well, you're part of this society, and this exists amongst your society, and maybe this is an output of the fact that we have tons of prosperity. We also have more waste than a country that maybe has less prosperity and less waste. I don't know.
Yeah, that's the most interesting idea here. I'd say that the idea of, like, we don't take ownership of our waste. And I think there is I think like that kills teams in software development.
See, there we go.
Right,
it
all comes back, right? Like tech debt. Like, tech debt is fine. Like, tech debt it's fine when you know what it is. When you say, we're taking on this tech debt in order to deliver faster, because we think by delivering faster, that's going to unlock more potential, right? Because we'll be able to make more money and get more resources, hire more engineers, right? Like that. That's fine. It's when you don't acknowledge it for what it is. We shipped a product that when it shipped, there were some features missing that some customers were very upset about. And just as a fast follow, we really quickly built those features and made sure they had it. We were always planning on building those features, but just as far as, like, MVP goes, we couldn't include them. And there was, in kind of a retro when talking about it, we were saying, like, look, it's fine to ship a product that will make customers upset, and you can own that and say, we understand some people will be upset by this. It's a deliberate choice we're making. We're prepared for the blowback. We have a plan, right? what was frustrating about this experience was we hadn't acknowledged that trade-off. We just kind of shipped it and we're like, oh, we didn't realize people would be so mad about this. Um, and it left us kind of like unable to defend our decision. So we're just scrambling to create those features really quickly. Um, and I think it's kind of the same thing when you talk about like, it's not exactly the same thing as waste, but it is related to that idea of ownership, which is like, I think a lot of decisions can be justifiable if you own them and acknowledge the relevant trade-offs.
Right.
But a lot of people don't own them, or even if they do own them, don't acknowledge the trade-offs that come with it. Um, we recently have just like, that's actually my big project for this week is we're moving to full CI/CD, right? Like, and this is, I I talk about this as a joke, but we were running our backend off Elastic Beanstalk, and I mentioned that to you, Nathan, and you're like, "What is this 2013?" And like, it's like, it's like that meme, like, and I took that personally. And I was like, screw you. And so
Oh,
I
man.
actually, no, and I mean that like in a good way, like it was a good kick in the pants. Like, and so I had been tasked with migrating. We are moving our front ends off of Azure to Amazon. And when we were doing that, we decided to do it like Azure. We were basically running like whatever the equivalent of Elastic Beanstalk on Azure is. And so we moved it to AWS. We're like, no, let's do this. Let's do it in ECS. That's Amazon's containerized service. And so it's it's like their managed version of Docker. And so we Dockerized the applications. We got them all running in ECS. And while I was doing that for each of the front ends, I was like, oh, our backend could do this exact same pattern, right? We could Dockerize it. We could run in ECS. It would deploy the exact same way. Like that's really neat. And so I did that too. And then because of that, there were some reasons with our old front end, like the website would go down when you deployed it. And so like we couldn't do like full CI/CD, but there had been an acknowledgement for a while with that kind of janky broken deployment process where we're like, listen, the time investment to fix this is not worth it quite yet because this is working for now. And we have a lot of features we need to deliver. But then we got to a point where we were actually not delivering as fast as we wanted to. Like that janky process was no longer an accelerator of our velocity. It was hindering it. And then it became time to say, okay, let's do it. But I think that's a good example of like knowing the trade-offs of what you're building and owning it. And then once those trade-offs no longer make sense, adjusting course.
Yeah.
This is me trying to shoehorn software development into this book.
No, and I think this is true. I think I can choose, like, for instance, you don't see this, but like my desk behind this is a little messier than I would want it to be. And that's okay. Like I acknowledge the waste that I have. But then I could also become a hoarder, right? And this whole room could be full of papers and books from floor to ceiling. And I think, there's a healthy amount of tech debt, and then there's an amount that's so bad that I can't find anything.
Right.
That people are uncomfortable if they see the space. There's like all these like things that could come from it. And I think, in software, we're on these accelerated change management timelines, right? We change things by design. Most people want steady state. They want simplicity, very few changes. And even if we give that perception of that, like, oh, I go to the Leland website and it's always up and I know where the menus are and stuff like this, you're pushing out new changes under the hood all the time. And so how do we make that as fluid, as easy, seamless as possible? And I think, like tidying up, some Marie Kondo type stuff is important.
And I've actually been really curious about this with like, because like I use Claude Code a ton at work, and just how the nature of tech debt is changing a little. Because I always think like the problem is with some engineers is they think like they're in it for like the love of the clean code itself, and it's really hard to like justify that from like a business perspective, right? Especially when you're at like a startup. Like we had a great quote over the offsite. I think it was like by Frank Sluden, who's like the CEO of ServiceNow, who said like startups like are dead by default. Like you kind of have to earn the right to live as a company, and when every day you're earning the right to live, you can't say, well, we should make this code cleaner because wouldn't it be nicer? When it makes sense to make code cleaner is when you're saying, listen, we cannot deliver as fast as we want to because every time I have to hop into this section of the code base, it's so hard to reason about that it takes way too long to add anything. So it's worth cleaning it up. Claude Code changes that, and Cursor and ChatGPT, because it has a easier time jumping into a big mess of a code base, understanding the nonsense written and then making those surgical incisions. Like we have a really bad practice in our code base of like the person who originally built it was not familiar with like the builder pattern in Java. And so like there's just so many object creations that's like 14, the constructor has like 14 variables, and then you'll add a new variable. And so like the constructor looks like this crazy thing, like value A, B, C, null, 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 D, null, null, E, F, G, null, null. And it's like insane. And you absolutely should use like the builder pattern to make that a lot easier to reason. And then when you update and add a new variable, you don't have to go back and adjust every constructor.
Right.
But Claude does that for you.
Yep.
It knows just where it is, and it goes and it updates for you. And so it's not as pressing an urge for us as a team to fix a lot of this janky code. I mean, yeah, this is like tangential, but as I've been working in like a bit more of a legacy code base using Claude, I find the nature of tech debt is evolving, and I find that really fascinating.
Yeah, I'm in the same boat. I have a big legacy code base where we're doing a fork. It's an open source project. We're doing a fork, and we're doing like a pretty big thing. And I'm not joking. We've been stacking PRs. So like I have a PR of like the ultimate change that we want to make.
Are you using Graphite?
No, I'm not.
Okay, look into that. That's like a tool my last place was really into.
That's cool. Yeah, no. But basically, I've been doing a PR into my PR. So it's like the poor man's version of real, stack PRs. But I wanted to merge this into this sort of big thing. But people can go back and look at the old PRs to see what the diffs are along the way. But we're down to like the code base only had maybe 65,000 lines of code. We've eliminated 21,000 lines of code. And it's just much easier to reason about. We've stripped out a lot of functionality that we don't need and we never will need. We have like a philosophical difference on security. But the sheer volume of that line count is quite overwhelming. And doing this refactor, having a companion like Cloud Code to do a planning session. I still do every code change myself. I don't vibe code with this because it's very important that everything's exactly right. But it can keep way more variables in its head. I can give it sort of subtasks to work on, and then critique as I'm going. So I'm still using a scalpel, but I'm using a scalpel where, I have some weird machine that knows the 500 incisions that we have to do in the correct order to do them in, right? And so that's what it's helping me with. And I will tell you, it's been immensely, and it's not test-driven development, but very similar. Like I make sure we're not breaking the unit tests. We're updating the end-to-end testing that's happening. And I have a lot more confidence that the behavior of the system is there. I would love to see a Michael Feathers rewrite of legacy code, refactoring legacy code with an AI stuff. That would be awesome, actually.
Yeah, I wonder if he has. I know he's working on like an AI.
Yeah, maybe this is
an AI book. Yeah.
Yeah, I wonder if that has anything to do with it. Because I will say, like, the less creative I ask Claude to be, if I give it a finite game versus an infinite game, oh man, we're really tying this one in. Claude's really bad at infinite games. It does not know how to do stuff for fun and just play through and iterate and become, vibing out. I think it's actually like a misunderstanding of what it does really well, which is find finite games that let you play the infinite game. Let Claude give it some constraints, give it a success criteria that's like very clear. It's like good management, right? And I think it was Mitchell Hashimoto, who's the one of the co-founders of HashiCorp, creators of Terraform and Vault and all that other stuff. I respect him a lot. He was co-CTO for a while and he stepped down. He liked being an IC. He became like a, distinguished engineer or whatever at HashiCorp. But then he finally left. And I don't know, I've switched terminal emulators not too long ago. I use Ghosty now.
Okay, I'm still on iTerm.
Yeah. So Ghosty's cool. I'll just give it a quick plug.
Well, my CTO uses Ghosty.
Yeah, so Ghosty is written in Zig, which is an up-and-coming language. It's still pre V1. Folks who are into the Go world, it's kind of like if Go and Rust had a baby. And it's kind of like an interesting little language. But it's a systems language. You can write, high performance stuff in it. Mitchell Hashimoto has been writing Ghosty just for the fun. It's his infinite game, right, that he's doing. And it's got a huge community behind it. It's a phenomenal terminal emulator. It has window tiling and a bunch of other kind of cool stuff. It just works great. But he recently posted, somebody was posting about their stuff on AI on lobsters. We'll put a link in the show notes. And Mitchell Hashimoto just chimes in the comments on lobsters. And he's like, hey, I actually been using AI a lot in my workflows. And I agree, like it does some things like really stupidly, but I actually find it really useful in these certain ways. And it's kind of like how we're talking. And he said he also agreed in the article that it trades one type of drudgery for another, meaning like I don't have to write markdown documents anymore, right? I can give it, I mean, like, here's this PR, did all this stuff, like help me write like a well organized, detailed PR that outlines these things, and I want this style to be here. And it can help me do that in its very pro-social kind of way. But you're also now, the drudgery is that you have to be a manager. Like everyone's a manager now, right? All of a sudden you're an AI agent manager.
Right.
And you might like that. I actually like it a lot, but I've also been in like tech lead and management roles.
Mm-hmm.
Some people, it's like a nightmare. You're like, oh, I don't want to be a manager. I don't want to manage and like describe something in grand detail. I'll write the code. And
yeah, I feel for those people because I've never been the kind of person who just takes a lot of joy in like the pure act of writing code. And so
right.
like it's been a while since I've like honestly written a line of code. Like
wow.
I use Claude. Like I use Claude a lot. And I shouldn't say that. Like I write. It's probably been a while since I've written more than 10 lines of code in a row.
Right.
So
but you're basically mob programming or pair programming
exactly.
That's
well,
so cool.
We're getting to the end here. Is it time for hot takes, or is there anything from the book you want to mention?
No, let's get into let's round out the episode.
This whole episode's been hot takes.
Right. Yeah, I think actually most of my hot takes, the zest has been pulled out of them already.
So. Right. I feel the same way too. I'll just say again, like I just think kind of like this Yoda speak, I think it's the lowest form of communication. I really believe, it's like a good design is not when there's nothing left to add, it's when there's nothing left to take away. And I feel the same with like clever code. Like just I would rather you write 8 lines of readable code than 4 lines of elegant, beautiful code that I have to take a second to reason about. I actually did this in an interview.
What about one line of like 5 levels deep of ternary operators?
Yeah. Then you should see our front end.
Oh man.
Yeah, I did this in an interview once where I wrote like some function and someone said like, the interviewer said like, well, wouldn't it be, they proposed a different way to do it, which would have been faster, but would have been, it was harder to reason about from like a first glance. Like this was like pretty simple, like JSON data manipulation. And I was just working in JavaScript and doing like pretty simple pipes and filters and maps and all that. And there was like 2, like you could combine like a pipe and a filter, or like a filter and a map step into the same thing or something. I don't remember exactly what it was. And you basically could take 2 of those steps and do it. One, you reduce 1 iteration through the list, right? But looking at the new solution, it wasn't as understood for a developer. And I had to kind of pause it for a sec and be like, wait, what is that doing? Oh, okay, it's doing that, right? And the argument I made was like, I don't know if that would be better, because if you think, right, like how often does this code run? Let's say this code runs 1,000 times a day. And let's say it takes 1 millisecond. Let's say that extra, by condensing those 2 things, we save 1 millisecond, right? That means every day we're saving 1 second of this code being run. So that's 365 seconds over the course of a year. But if once a year, someone has to look at this function and they take 5 more minutes to understand it, right? Or 6 more minutes to understand it than they would have previously, then we actually haven't saved any time at all, right? And so, I don't think it's just one way of thinking about it.
So another thing I've actually gotten to doing more too is I'll sometimes put a to do with my initials in it and say, right, I don't love this. I think this has a code smell. I think we could flatten this, but I haven't figured out a good way to do it yet. Right. Like, and just put that note to myself so that if somebody comes along and goes, oh no, we need to do the next one, they at least, or, flatten it or whatever. They might go at least to take pause and go, oh, Carter ran into this and he couldn't figure out a good way to do it. Maybe I'll go ask him real quick.
And I love that. And it's also like implicit permission, because sometimes you'll see something in a code base and be like, this seems weird. Maybe it's weird because it was the only way to do it. And so I'm not going to touch it. But if you leave a comment that's like, hey, like, I couldn't figure out a better way to do this. If you can be my guest, then you're like, okay, yeah, because they might come to it and be like, oh, I see immediately how we should improve
I had
this.
one engineering team that was really good about this, and most of the companies I've been in don't do this. But I've had one
Right.
that was like, it was this like academic curiosity. And obviously, if it was critical code path, bad performance, those would get fixed. But the other one was
Mhm.
like, I think there's something juicy here. I'll come back at another time, and here's my thoughts. And I always love that because like sometimes you had an extra half a day on a Friday, and you notice some kind of interesting thing, and you maybe I'll take a crack at that, and kind of surprise this other person.
Yeah. So I just think like all that to say, I don't have a ton of patience for like stuff like sometimes it's like people talk in a way where they're basically trying to impress themselves. I just think the hallmark of good communication is how well it's understood by
Right.
its listeners or receivers. And I listen, I'm not the smartest guy in the world. I am pretty verbally adept. Obviously, we read a lot of books on this podcast and we've been able to talk about lots of them. I'm pretty good at reading a book and understanding it. And I just kind of think like if I'm reading your book and I'm like, what the freak is he talking about here? Then you've missed so many more people. And
Right.
I think that's a flaw. I think it's a flaw in a book.
Yeah. I completely understand that. I think I'll do a speed run of my hot takes. Yes, obscure and repetitive writing, right? This sort of it was like either intellectual and I'm just too dumb, or it was pseudo intellectual, right? It was one of these. I'll leave this to the listener to make their decision on this one. But it's got a very strong style, and it's either going to resonate or you're just going to hate it. It's oil and water. The sexuality chapter didn't land. I don't think it aged well. I think maybe society wasn't as disturbed by some, sexual proclivities, and maybe he would have, been cleaner about his communication these days. I do think that, and again, I loved this book because it was no practical application. But I do think a hot take is that like there is no practical application from reading this book. You had to listen to a lecture and have a big discussion back and forth on how we could
Right.
actually apply it. Not once did it help you show, here's an infinite game in my life, or here's a finite game that
Right.
made me miserable. And then when I thought about the infinite game version of it, it actually made it a lot of fun. And that's unfortunate. Again, I think that's the big thing. Last one is oversimplification. Oversimplification, right?
Right. You're right. There's a lot of binaries.
Everything being finite or infinite, in a lot of places it felt natural, but some of them you're like, okay, were you given a minimum word count or something? Like, what's going on here? So,
okay. Sorry, I wrote these my notes prior to this discussion, and so I'd say this is a hallmark of good discussion because I have changed my mind on some of these things.
ooh.
But what will you do differently in your career as a result of this book? I wrote, forget I ever read this book. Which I will say after this, I do want to be better about kind of thinking about like that finite and infinite game modality. Like I think it helps to understand, like, you can think about it in like a meta sense and like a career. Like, is this job I'm at, is this a finite game? Is this something because I have a very clear understanding of what I'm hoping to get out of it? And once I get that thing out of it, I'm out of here. Or is this an infinite game where I need to be thinking in the long run? I think there's even some things like tasks like that. Like, I think sometimes you do just ship a feature and like it's a finite feature. You're like, I don't really care how well this works. Like, it's just another thing, as long as you get the job done, it gets the job done. But then there's kind of the more infinite game of like, I've just been really knee deep in our architecture at work lately. And like that to me is a bit more of an infinite game of like, okay, we need to make the correct choices here. How we define how we do this is going to have a lot of downstream effects. And so I think recognizing the difference between those two is something I'll do a better job at. I don't think I need to read this whole book to come to that conclusion.
No, exactly.
Yeah.
And for me, yes, it's the same thing of like, do the gut check. Am I playing the finite game to play the finite game, or am I playing the finite game in a long string of finite games for my infinite game? I think that you're right. You can make a finite game of architecture and say, did Amazon Web Services give me the pat you on the back, well architected system award? and now
Right.
I've actually
Right.
architected something beautifully? Or have I built an evolutionary architecture so that when the business needs change down the road, it's easier for us to have optionality,
Right.
to have these changes? That's the infinite game. You're
Hmm.
acknowledging, hey, you know, Leland's still figuring stuff out. Like, we're still figuring out what our customers are. We're figuring out how we're going to scale. And the infinite game here is that, yeah, we're going to have to keep coming back to this. We're going to keep, figuring out what a good fit is for us. And yeah, I think that's cool.
Well, as far as who you would recommend this book to, again, I put prior to the episode, absolutely no one. I, I'll say after this, I still think I'm with you, Nathan. I think you could read the first chapter, and that's about 85% of the good stuff in this book. And actually, after having discussed this, I would recommend that lecture you mentioned.
Yes.
Like
Oh,
the
it's so good.
90-minute lecture, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, okay, that's great. Listen to that while you're on a jog. Listen to that while you're commuting. Like, that sounds like a great idea, especially because you do hear, like, this book has popped up in a couple of the books we've read. I hear it floating in kind of like the software engineering milieu. And so I would recommend that lecture. And if you're really curious, I would read like the first chapter of this book. The rest of it, like I did not enjoy it, and I would not recommend it.
Yeah.
How about you, Nathan?
If you're a glutton for punishment, if you listen to this episode and you were like, man, I want to read that book, you should read the book. Like,
Absolutely.
if we didn't scare you off and you're like, oh, I haven't read enough Yoda speak in my life, I'd like to see some more Yoda speak. And I would like him to reiterate the same idea with like 101 different modalities, because there's 101 actual little stanzas in this book,
Right.
across 7 chapters. If you want to wrestle with that sort of ivory tower college professor way of looking at stuff, and maybe you've read some Boyard or something, go for it. It's going to fit right in. Everyone else, I think, take Carter's advice. Like, listen to this episode, read the first chapter if you want to like be able to speak to it intelligently, and watch that lecture or listen to the lecture. And yeah, you can intelligently speak on it, and you can have the ideas influence you, because finite versus infinite games is a nice idea. I think that objectively, are you doing something for its own sake and for the joy of it, or are you doing something for an outcome? And what should you expect when you do one versus the other?
Well, you know what? It's good to read things you disagree with, because one, sometimes you'll change your mind. I've changed my mind on some things over the course of this podcast. And two, the next time someone comes up to me and says, like, you know what is my life philosophy? Finite and infinite games. And be like, okay, yeah. But like, it helps you to,
what was your favorite chapter?
Yeah,
the sexuality one.
yeah. Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Let me see your hard drive, buddy.
Okay.
Yeah. That's how it all ties back to Made to Stick. Jared Fogle, this was his favorite book. This was his favorite chapter, was the sexuality chapter.
Oh boy.
Yeah, but it's good to read stuff you disagree with, because maybe you change your mind, or maybe you just become more certain of your assumptions, right? And I've talked about that with Book Overflow a lot. Is like, people say, like, do you think you're learning a lot from the podcast? And I say, yeah, I think so. Like, I think I am learning a lot more of the why behind a lot of like why good software looks like it does, or good architecture looks like it does. But really, the big benefit of this podcast has been confirming a lot of my previous assumptions, right? Like, I knew that like Dockerized applications were a good idea in theory, but after reading like the DevOps handbook, I can point to a lot more of like this.
Mm-hmm.
These are the concrete benefits you get out of this system. And it makes it a lot easier when you're proposing changes at work, or understanding why something was built the way it was, the benefits you're getting out of it. So yeah,
Carter,
that's just another plug.
I hope in the not too distant future, I hear you start talking about hermetic builds.
Hermetic builds. Okay.
Yeah.
I
got you to say it. It's great.
Yeah. Well, that wraps it up for this week, folks. Let us know what you thought of the episode. Hopefully we were able to tie it back to software engineering enough to make it relevant to the podcast. And hey, listen, we did with 99 bottles of OOP, and you said, we love this. We want to hear you guys talk, have some more spicy takes about books. So here you go. And as always, if you want to get feedback on the episode, leave a comment or email us at contact@bookoverflow.io. We're on Twitter at Book Overflow Pod. I'm on Twitter at Carter Morgan, and Nathan at his newsletter, Functionally Imperative, or at functionallyimperative.com. Thanks for listening, folks. You guys are the reason we are doing this podcast. So We appreciate all your support, and we'll see you around.
See ya.